ابتدا سازم به نام آن خدا کوست بخشاینده و صاحب عطا. Begin shall I by the name of the one who's benevolent and benign. Salam و درود and hello everyone. I am so happy to be part of this beautiful conference. Let us begin in me presenting my research onto the history of the tarot, in particular taromancy, the divination with the use of these playing cards. So let us start slowly going backwards from where we are right now. The tradition of taromancy that is practiced today around the world is basically on the foundations of the works of MacGregor Mathers, one of the founders of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And his book, The Tarot, Its Occult Significance and Method of Play, is actually the first English book written on the tarot back in 1888. And in it, he says, concealed behind their apparently arbitrary and bizarre designs, the tarot cards contain a far more complicated system of recondite symbolism. Recondite means obscure or occult. And this sentence, I love it a lot because it does encompass everything that the occult or esoteric or magical or fortune-telling tarot means and encompasses. The structure of the tarot practice, the taromancy that we do today, is mostly influenced by the works of Aleister Crowley and Frida Harris on the Thoth Tarot, and Arthur Edward Wade and Pamela Coleman Smith on the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot, which I personally call it the Pixie Tarot. So these two decks have influenced the practice of taromancy that is prominent around the world today. Both of these, well, all four of these people, in a way, were influenced by MacGregor and Moina Mathers, two of the founders of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and the tarot deck that they created together, which was kind of immortalized in Book T. We don't have any of the decks that they made. It hasn't survived, or at least we don't know where they are. But Book T still remains today, and we can see how Edward Wade concealed and compressed the teachings of Book T, and Aleister Crowley, on the other hand, expanded and explored it even more and added more things to it. But Moina and MacGregor Mathers themselves were influenced by the works of Alphonse Louis Constant, or Eliphas Lévy, a French occultist back in the mid-19th century, and all of the amazing things that he did with regards to magical practice. One of them was introducing the 22 Hebrew alphabets being connected to the 22 major arcana of the tarot. And this became the foundation on which MacGregor Mathers and Moina Mathers made their deck. But Alphonse Louis himself was following in the footsteps of Jean-Baptiste Alliette, or Eteia, and Court de Gébelin, who came up with the idea that the tarot was an ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic symbolic book that after the fall of Egypt, it was taken to Europe via the Roma people. And they came up with this ancient origin idea and called the tarot the Book of Thoth. So this is the lineage of the taromancy practice that we know today, and it is all built on suggesting a hidden symbolism inside the cards. However, as we know today, these were not factually and historically true. The symbolism that is inside the tarot is not related into the ways that these people actually analyzed or gave an understanding of what it is. But there is another true history to the playing cards, and today I'm going to get into that. In order to understand what is the true symbolism of the tarot, and by true I mean the historical lineage, we have to use the methodologies of the esoteric studies, which is a new field of academic study, and it is an interdisciplinary study of metaphysical, lost, or reserved forms of intellectual knowledge. So basically, the understandings and the knowledge and the rituals and the practices that are inherently ineffable, they are metaphysical, or they are lost in history and we don't have records of their origins or what they were, or they were reserved, they were esoteric, they were behind initiatory stages, or hidden in symbolic, visual, or literally forms, like the images of the alchemical process or the Sufi poetry in general. These hidden or lost or ineffable knowledge, they can be understood through the use of various methodologies like comparative religion, sociology, anthropology, psychology, art history, and basically in a kind of a detective work, as I see it, we go into understanding what were the ideas that these people had, what were the books that they read, what were the political and historical and also their personal lives look like that influenced them in coming up with these ideas. And that's how the esoteric studies works. And I had the privilege of working at the Embassy of the Free Mind, the home to the Bibliotheca Philosophica Hermetica in Amsterdam, where all of these esoteric studies and methodologies were used in order to preserve these knowledges. And this is a moment that I say, unfortunately, we lost the founder of this great, great, amazing library and museum, Joost Ritman, just last week. And it is a really sad, but also part of life. But his legacy will live on through all of the work that we are doing as scholars and the people who appreciate these practices or magical things. So even though esoteric studies is a beautiful academic field of study and it works and it helps for us to understand these traditions, but like any other field of study, especially such a young field of study, they have flaws and they can be improved. And my work has led into bringing up ideas and suggestions for improving this field of study. And the main one is the employment of decolonization, the methodology that tries to dismantle the hierarchies of knowledge, the ways that we look at the world in academia established by colonial powers, by post-colonial Victorian England and European Western American ideas who did not understand the true meaning and the true life experiences and cultural experiences of the indigenous people. And we are trying to dismantle those ideas and restoring the marginalized traditions into their indigenous intellectual, cultural, and spiritual frameworks in order so we can get into a more conclusive understanding of the world. Because when the foundation of religious studies or historical studies around the world was built at the end of the 19th century, they were projecting a lot of their own, let's just say, racist or xenophobic or anti-Semitic or elitist ideas onto understanding how Islam or Buddhism works. This is what they did. There is no denying it. But I understand decolonization is a really scary word. It does sound like I am asking people to do something or be something that they are not. But there are many reasons behind it. And unfortunately, as I have been trying to do this work, I have been met with all of these different approaches. We have on one side people who are saying, well, why are you bringing all of these things from the past? I am not racist. Why are you, pushing me and giving me all of these things? And on the other hand, I have people who are really excited and interested about it, and they want to learn more. And today I want to make this distinction in these two images. On one hand, and here we have Aleister Crowley in his, let's just call it Middle Eastern attire. And I just want to mention how there are many problematic things with Aleister Crowley and how he talks about different cultures. There's been a lot of work on this, but I do want to say that this is not enough. There are layers upon layers of Aleister Crowley's life that we have to dissect and understand and try to not be that. For example, in the Book of Thoth, the book that we all read about the Tarot, Aleister Crowley says on page 206, the Jews are the vilest of the parasitic races. There are all of these intense expressions of anti-Semitism that Aleister Crowley has. And if today we want to work with Aleister Crowley, and especially his teachings on the Kabbalah, which was a Jewish practice, we have to be aware of his positioning and how he saw himself. There are many ways that I can go deeper into, but I'm not going to talk about Crowley per se. I'm just giving an example that his idea and his visions of Judaism was they have this knowledge, Kabbalah, and they did a good thing with it, but it's not theirs. It is mine. I'm going to take it. I'm going to use it for myself. Yes, they had their things with it, but they are a vile, parasitic race, and it is better to be left to us to continue the tradition of Kabbalah. This was his idea. But now we look at Crowley's work and we see all of these problematic things. I am proposing this method of decolonization so that we cannot do the same thing as Crowley did, because this is the main thing about racism and colonization and elitism, and also the idea of whiteness is that as societies grow, we understand more and more how the things that we used to do were wrong, and we want to be part of that. This is where the second picture comes in. Michael Dummett is basically the founder of the history of tarot. He built this beautiful methodological foundation of how to understand the history of tarot. The amazing thing about him is that he is knighted. He is Sir Michael Dummett, and his knighthood was due to his anti-racist work at the university. He was fiercely an advocate for anti-racism and anti-immigration laws back in the day, and you can see him here at a protest supporting immigration and asylum. When I see myself working in tarot, I do see myself being in this back and forth position of wanting to be more like Dummett, but also wanting to be like Crowley. So I use both of them in the process of decolonization to remove all of the falsehoods, all of the wrong ideas from Aleister Crowley, and go towards helping the world in understanding these beauties. But unfortunately, the problem is that it's not something that I can force onto others. Or if you're not doing decolonization, you are a racist person or a bad person. That is not the case at all. You can do whatever it is that you feel. You can explore the universe in all of the ways that you want. Decolonization helps us to go deeper and deeper into layers of ourself and cleansing them so that we can see the evidence for the creator, something that the magicians are trying to do as well. And I am bringing my method of doing that. So if all of these ideas that I said about decolonization is not enough for you, there is another final one that comes from the Sufi practice that I am part of. And I'm going to say it in a Rumi story, which is called The Maiden and the Ass, on the importance of true mastery. So the story goes that once upon a time, there was a lady who owned a maiden and a donkey. And the maiden was in charge of taking care of the donkey, feeding the donkey and cleaning the donkey. But the maiden comes up with an ingenious idea of sleeping with the donkey. She trains the donkey to have sex like human beings. She puts the stool underneath the donkey and goes under the donkey. However, she understands that the penis of the donkey is a bit big for her body. So she advises this plan of putting a pumpkin inside the penis of the donkey so that the penis will not go all the way in and destroy her belly. So she continues to do this practice for some time and enjoy herself in all of the imaginable ways. But the donkey itself develops a severe case of the blue balls. And this makes the donkey to become thinner and not sleep and not eat. And the lady notices. She asks for the vet to come and check the donkey. The vet doesn't find anything. The lady suspects that the maiden might be doing something to the donkey. So one day when the maiden is inside the stable and having sex with the donkey, the lady goes, opens the door, looks through the doorway and sees what is going on. And instead of doing the sensible thing, which is coming in and saying, what the hell is this that you're doing? She says, that is my donkey. If anyone is going to enjoy that donkey, it should be me, not this maiden who is a nobody. She calls for the maiden to come and sends her on an errand and goes inside the stable to have sex with the donkey. She puts the stool down, goes under the donkey, but since she was looking through a crack in the door, she did not see the maiden use the pumpkin. So she does not insert the pumpkin inside the penis of the donkey. And when the donkey inserts himself inside her, he sees that there is no blockage and he goes fully erect, thrusts inside her, cuts her in half, and she dies on the floor, filled with her blood and the of the donkey. And this is why we should not learn the spiritual practice of another culture, of another person, without learning it from a master. This is what Rumi is emphasizing, that if we want to learn about a spiritual thing and we just read some books about it or see some YouTube videos, we are the ones who are just trying to have sex with this donkey that we find really attractive. But it is only through the teachings of a teacher and a master that we can understand how it is truly done. So today what I'm going to do is offer you a pumpkin whenever you want to start learning the spiritual practice of a culture that is not yours. If you want to learn Kabbalah, if you want to learn yoga, if you want to learn Sufism, even Tarot, you can use this pumpkin in order for you to be safe and not be destroyed by the penis that you do not know how to use. And the methodology goes this way. You are interested and attracted to a practice, so you find a teacher or a book to guide you in learning that practice. But instead of just doing whatever the teacher tells you, you go back into the lineage of the teacher. Who was the teacher of my teacher? What were the lineage that these teachers that led to me have been from? Until you find the root of that practice. And then inside the root, you take a look at all of these various traditions that are inside that region. For example, if you want to learn Kabbalah, you read Crowley's Kabbalah, and then you learn that Crowley learned it from Alphonse Louis, and then you learn that Alphonse Louis learned it from the Jewish people in Spain. And how did the Jewish people in Spain talk about Kabbalah? You look at their true indigenous traditions, and then you find differences. For example, you will see that Bina, the third Sephira, is Saturn according to Crowley, but according to no Jewish tradition, Bina is Saturn. And this difference that you find helps you to integrate this system in a better way. This is the decolonization method that I am offering, and I'm going to do it today with the tarot so that you learn it. The way that we're going to do it today is that we have the practice of tarot that we love so much and we want to learn. And we have teachers, guidebooks, or YouTube videos, or masters who have spent their lives learning about the tarot, and then they have left books for us to learn and read. And then we look at their lineage and we see that they're all coming from the Western esoteric traditions, the ones that I just talked about, Alphonse Louis, Côte de Gemelon, and all of them, until you reach the root of them, which is the emergence of playing cards in Europe, which were called naibi. And from there, you look at all of the different various cultures and traditions that the naive cards have created over these years. And this is where I recommend reading the book. It's really, really amazing, The History of Tarot, Truths and Legends by Gianardo Berti. And it's the best book so far on the history of Tarot. And then I am going to explain how I look at the tarot, how I analyze and understand what the tarot is, so that you can compare it with the way that Crowley does it, so that you get a reference of how you can come up with your own way of understanding these cards. So playing cards were originated and invented in China during the 12th and 13th century, and they were called jipai. And they were made as a gambling device, and they would play this game Mao Jiao. And of course, there were all of these different ways that these cards were used. They could be used for divination. There are some evidence for that. But they had these four suits based on money denominations. We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 9 of cash or coins. And then we have strings of coins or cash, 1, 2, 3, all the way until 9. And then we have myriads of coins, and then tens of myriads. And these myriads and tens of myriads, they depicted characters from a novel which is called Water Margin, and they were like folklore heroes in China. So these were the first playing cards, and they were based on money suits, and they would play a trick-taking game with these cards, which means, you would play like the three of coins, for example, and then everybody had to play from the coins, and the one that had the highest coin would win that trick. So these cards made their way to West Asia through the Mongol invasions, and they inspired the creation of Ganjifa cards in Iran, Syria, Egypt, and India. All playing cards in West Asia were called Ganjifa, and probably they were first created in Iran, in Tabriz. And the oldest Ganjifa cards that we have in Iran had 8 suits, and each of them had 10 numbers and 2 court cards: Wazir, Minister, and Shah, King. And this is a discovery that I have made, which is these 8 suits of the Persian Ganjifa actually correspond or were created in attribution with the 7 classical planets. We had the suit of the slaves, which was Saturn, and we had the suit of crowns, which was Jupiter. The suit of swords was Mars. Gold coin was Sun. Harp was Venus. Barat or decree was Mercury, and silver coins were the moon. And of course, we had goods or stuff, which was the North Node, which is really important in Persian and Indian astrology. The Ganjifa cards introduced the idea of these suits and also the court cards. And these Ganjifa cards went to Syria, Egypt, and India, and each place had their own version. Then we have the Mamluk Ganjifa, which was created in Syria and Egypt. And these became the foundation of the cards that made their way to Europe. These ones, they had 4 suits: dirham or coin, sword, polo stick, and tuman. When they came to Europe, the dirham or coin and the sword suit remained the same, but the polo stick and tuman were transformed into wands and cups. And they also had 3 court cards. They had the Lord or the King, and the Deputy and the Second Deputy. These were the 3 court cards. And when they came to Europe, they became King, Knight, and Knave, and later Queen was added to it to make it more European. We don't know almost anything about these Mamluk cards, save for the fact that you see these texts written on top of them. They are poetry, and they're resembling Sufi poetry. So there is more research to be done on the symbolism of these cards, what they meant, and what were their meanings, which I'm working on them, and I'm going to start a PhD on it soon. So stay tuned. These cards, with their 52 system, they make their way to Europe, and they become the Naibi cards in Italy and Spain. And it was in Italy in the first 50 years of their existence that they inspired all of these different innovations, until in 1440 Florence, the Italians come up with the addition of a suit of triumphs and a wild card, the Fool, to change the trick-taking game of this beautiful game. And they were first all these royalty commissioned illuminated cards, but then within a half a century they became more printed on inexpensive paper and be widespread. And of course, still they were used mostly for playing cards, but the Mantegna engravings and also the Solabusca could be seen as bearing some educational or esoteric meanings behind them. But then these cards, they go outside of Italy and they go to France. We have by 1500, the iconography, the arrangement, and the rules of the play of these cards were canonized in the name Tarocchi, Tarot, or Tarot. And the etymology of the Tarot is most likely foolishness. Influenced by the wild card, the Fool, the cards became Tarocchi, Tarot, foolishness. When they came to France, they spread like wildfire really fast, and they created all of these workshops which would publish thousands of decks every year in Marseille, Lyon, and Paris. By 1600, one pattern, which later was called Tarot de Marseille, became the blueprint for all of the French decks. As these cards travel outside their original context in Florence, over time, different interpretation, different visual ways, were, drawn, and their symbolism start to change and shift. And I have one example here, which is really cute. It's the Wheel of Fortune. At the beginning in the Italian cards, the Wheel of Fortune depicted these four characters around the wheel. One says, I am reigning. One says, I have reigned. The other one says, I reign nothing. And this one says, I shall reign. So it's the depiction of the changes of humanity's fate. And they had, these tails and horns because they wanted to be depicted as stupid animal people who believe where they are is where they are supposed to be, like they have control over their fate, so they're like animalistic. And this visual motif was transformed into full-on humanoid characters. And it's really funny how it was taken out of their context. This is also another beautiful one. You see this little tail that this creature had was transformed into a fire, and the head was transformed into a baby down here. It's like one of the cute things that happen. And then finally, we have the one that Alphonse Louis made, where he transformed these characters into Hermanobis, Sphinx, and Typhoon. And this is the image that led to us now. Now that we know how these cards came to be in this manner, as to lead to the way that the Western esoteric traditions took these ideas, now we're going to look at what was the symbolism of the triumph cards, what they actually meant. When the people who created them in Italy, what were they thinking? Unfortunately, we are not 100% sure of what were they thinking. My own speculation is that they were different artists, did different things, and at a certain point, they all got merged together. But there is one theory by Gertrude Mockley, which is one of my favorite theories in the history of tarot. All of these different people, the Book of Thoth, the Hebrew alphabets or astrological correspondences, all of these theories that are out there, I love this one the most, and that is the tarot cards. They want to tell the story of I Trionfi, written by Petrarch, who is sometimes called the father of humanism, which was written around 50 years before the creation of the tarot. And it has a really amazing, beautiful story, this poem, I Trionfi, or Triumphs. And the story is that Petrarch himself was in love with this lady, Laura, and it was a really passionate love for this lady. But this lady was married. She was already married, so she did not reciprocate that love. And he did not get married because of that. And he kept this love all his life. And this is the first part of the poem that he wrote. He wrote about the triumph of love over the affairs of the people, the kings, the commoners, and the popes. And then there is the triumph of chastity over love. And chastity is the fact that Laura chose to stay true to her marriage instead of being with Petrarch. And this led to Petrarch himself dedicating his life to being a chaste person as well, and finally be crowned with this laurel wreath as a scholar and a poet. But then a few years later, Laura passed away due to the plague, the Black Death. And that's when Petrarch wrote the second phase of the poetry about the triumph of death over chastity. And then he had become famous by that time and knew that his poetry is going to be remembered for a long time. That's when he added the triumph of fame over death, that you might die, but your name and your work will live on after you. But then after the triumph of fame, we have the triumph of time. That doesn't matter how great and amazing person you are, time devours all and you will not be remembered. And finally, the last part of the poem is the triumph of eternity over time, which is the God itself, basically. And this is where he would say, I will be united with my Laura at the end of time, at the end of eternity, when we are united in facing God. So this is a beautiful poem that was written over 20 years and through the experiences that Petrarch had. And the theory of Gertrude Mockley is that these 21 plus 1 triumph cards, they represent this story. Of course, it is not a complete match because there are extra cards, but I love it. And I want to use it to explain the 21 triumph cards from a humanist perspective. This is the thing that I want to bring home for you, that the triumphs, the major arcana, are not coming from Jewish traditions or Christian traditions or Muslim traditions. They are inherently humanistic. They are an observation by a humanist who wants to encompass the experience of living as a human from birth to death and beyond. So I'm going to explain the symbolism of each card like really quickly. And also I have artifacts from the history of humanity, which are way older than the tarot cards, to kind of show how these images are symbols that have been used by different cultures in different parts of the world. There is no continuous, lineage, but rather there is this overarching general notion to them. I'm not going to use the word archetype because I do not like that word, but I think you can understand. So the first 7 cards of the tarot, but of course the Fool should not be considered as the first card because the Fool is an excuse. It's a wild card. It can move all around. It can be used at any time. It doesn't have value, but I'm going to group it together. These are the characters that are triumphed by love. The Fool and Le Battleur or Il Bagatto or the Magician, they are the homeless and the entertainers or the artisans. These two represent the lowest caste of society. And if you want to know what these cards mean, you can think of like to Elon Musk, who just became a trillionaire a few days ago, we are either foolish, homeless, useless people, or we are labor force, basically people who can do stuff for him to make his money. This is the general notion that these two cards want to represent, and you can see them here in this Egyptian temple wall, where we have the dancers and the musicians and a court dwarf. This is the oldest depiction of these two cards. Then we have the priestess and the empress, which are the high female roles in society, the highest ones. This cylinder seal of the Sumerians. And here we have the queen, and here we have a priestess. Of course, the priestess represents the feminine people who were in the temples and doing the work of God or gods. And the queen, of course, becomes the female ruler. And then we have the two male hierarchies in the court, the emperor and the pope. And here we have another Sumerian image of the king. This is one of the oldest images of a king. And we have this Sumerian statue again that represents a worshiper, which is one of the images of the oldest of the popes. So you can see these 4 cards represent the castes of the rulers and of the clergy. But no matter where you are in this scale, love is the one that has a higher value and it triumphs over them. And here we have this image. It's one of the oldest statues that is found. I think it's 12,000 years old, and it is 2 lovers in embrace. Then we have the cards that constitute the triumph of chastity over love. We have the 3 virtues grouped together in the later traditions and the traditions that we know today. These are spread over the deck, but here and in the early editions, they were grouped together. We have the temperance, which is the practice of making wine less poignant and diluting it with water so that you have control over your drunkenness. This was a virtue in ancient Greece, which you can see here. And the virtue of strength and fortitude is the courage and the resilience against the difficulties of life and the fear of being destroyed, where you want to be powerful and you want to stay strong. And we have this one of the oldest, this is the oldest artifact in the world. I think it's 35,000 years old, the lion human, found in Germany. And this is a depiction of the strength. And then we have justice, which is the notion of justice. I don't need to talk about it a lot. And the oldest depiction of justice is the scales of Ma'at. This is actually one of the beautiful things. Among all of the cards of the tarot, this is the only card that actually has an ancient Egyptian origin. So Court de Gebelin, Alphonse Louis, Aleister Crowley, they were right about this card being an ancient Egyptian card because the image of the scales did come from ancient Egypt and the scales of Maat. Then we have the chariot, which is the depiction of chastity itself. And one of the oldest depictions is Darius the Great. That Darius the Great is the Iranian king who is hunting the lion in his chariot. And the chariot is a depiction of you as a conquering charioteer. And then we have the Wheel of Fortune, which I talked a bit about. It's about the hands of fate. And this mosaic in Greece is one of the oldest depictions of the Wheel of Fortune as a notion of how we need to ask the favor of fortune. Then we have the cards that constitute the triumph of death over chastity. We have the Hermit, which is a depiction of the old man, an old man time, Chronos. And Chronos actually has its roots in the Mesopotamian flood myths. So Noah, for example, you can think. Basically, everybody who survived the big flood, they were seen as these immortal beings. And that's where the idea of Hermit and Chronos and Saturn come from. And then we have the Hangman, which is depicting capital punishment. And this Egyptian depiction of beheaded soldiers is one of the older images that we have. Then we have the death, of course, and humanity has been creating these skeleton shapes as a way of depicting death for thousands of years. I think this is 20,000 years old. And then we have the devil, which is a depiction of evil forces. And this is one of the characters that was in the Babylonian myths, the storm god of evil origins. And we have the tower, which is the depiction of the Tower of Babel, when people were building these towers to be famous and to be known for all eternity, but God's lightning comes and destroys them. And it was inspired by the ziggurats that the Babylonians would make, but they would be destroyed. And then when the Jewish people would go to Babylon and see these destroyed ziggurats, they come up with the story of the Tower of Babel. And then we have the triumphs of time and eternity. The star, the moon, and the sun, they represent how humanity uses the constellations, the phases of the moon, and the movement of the sun as timekeeping. This is what these cards meant. And finally, we have the judgment, which was the depiction of the end of time. And finally, the universe or the world, which is a depiction of the rulership of God on the planet, on this earth, on this world. And these cards were depicted as the celestial visions, the eternal visions, the triumph of time and eternity. So the way that I use all of the knowledge that I talked about here is that the Chinese culture invented the cards which represented value and hierarchy, and they were governed by fortune. The idea of gambling was inherent in these cards. The idea of, I'm going to pull a card and it is going to mean something. It is my fortune that it is been given to me. And then the Iranians, they added the court figures and they reflected the drama of humanity in both cosmological and social and even personal registers. That's where the court cards come from. And then the Syrians and the Egyptians, they created the 4 suits, and these 4 suits and their 10 denominations and the court cards that were made by Iranians, they became adaptable to any Pythagorean Pythagoras system. The New Platonists, all of the 4 elements that we use, the 4 worlds, the 4 seasons, they were all coming from Pythagoras. And the Syrians and the Egyptians, they gave us this system to use. And then in Italy, we have the triumph cards that are created by a humanist map of universal lived experiences and their moral significances. And then we have in France, where the tarot's iconography was systematized, and the idea of cartomancy and fortune telling with cards became a thing. And then the English people took this idea of fortune telling and mapped out all of these different esoteric traditions onto it, and they created the idea of tarot as a mystical and magical tool. And finally, in the 20th century, we have in the Americas, the cards became more of a universal, inexhaustible source of psychological, artistic, and intellectual reinventions. They have been expressed in all of these different ways, and all of these different traditions and all of these different disciplines have used them. And finally, right now, we are living in the era where social media has breathed new life into tarot as a medium for self-reflection, where we have TikTokers who explain their life, they express themselves through using the tarot without looking at any of these traditions that we have talked about. And that's the beauty that I see in the tarot. For us to be able to see the image of ourselves through these cards and how all of these different traditions have helped us and left something in the cards for us to be able to see them today. Thank you very much. And yeah, looking forward to your questions.